Good evening and welcome. Thank you for being here. This evening's recital is a culmination of much effort on two fronts, so we're just going to speak briefly about both of those. From the music side of things, Caleb's recital is a reflection of his interests and his focus through his time here. And so it's interesting to see his versatility as a musician in the different areas that he's interested in. And when he brought this project to me, it is not a conventional senior recital. Most senior recitals require very specific things, but because of the scholarship aspect that he invested in it, I thought that it was very fitting, and especially as it represented his interests and his work. The instrument he'll be using, in addition to his trombone, of course, is our Hauptwerk organ. And this is a digital instrument that works on sampling technology so that you hear complete instruments in their environment available for playback. So he'll be using several instruments this evening that are in line with the era and the style of the music that he's playing. So there'll be some switching around with those kinds of things. And very grateful for his colleagues that have offered to help him in this endeavor. So looking forward to that. And Dr. Denslow will just speak a little bit to the honors side of things.
Thank you. So as Dr. Howard just mentioned, this is the culmination of not only Caleb's music degree, but also his honors program requirements. One factor of graduating with honors is the completion of a senior project, lest you think that's no big deal. The students spend minimum 3 semesters planning, researching, and presenting on this project. And so Caleb has spent a lot of hours not just rehearsing, but working through the scholarship on this particular topic. So we're really proud to introduce him on both of those fronts tonight. I'm really proud of the work that he has accomplished, and I'm looking forward to listening. I don't know about you guys.
So just one other thing on the format, this is a lecture recital, so it's fairly equal performing and speaking. And you'll hear quite a bit of information from him. And there's also a paper that goes along with it that's submitted and vetted by the Honors Committee. So if you're interested in reading that, that's also available at a later date, of course, in our Chan Shun Library. So those are all housed there. So that's the format, and we are pleased to welcome Caleb Whittington.
I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight. I greatly appreciate it. I realize that not everybody may be able to have made it here in person, but to those who are online, I also really, really appreciate it. It doesn't matter whether you're near or far. It's always great for you to be able to be here and be a part of something, and I'm especially glad it's something that's mine. Today, I'd like to offer you a thought about music. See, we oftentimes think about music as something that is rigid in form and is only used as a communication tool virtuosically and emotionally to our fellow human being. But I'd like to question that thought and argue that, in fact, music is not just a rigid form, but it is, in fact, a living and growing thing. The thing about that, and the way I'd like to properly defend my argument, is that music has continuously earned new forms, new techniques, new ideas as it's progressed throughout time. And the only way we can truly see that progression, at least on some level, is to look back through history and try our best to discern it. And so in order to do that, I have you'll see in your program, I've laid out a main theme that we will be looking through, and that is Ein Festeberg, or as it is more commonly known in the English language, A Mighty Fortress. It's a wonderful theme for those who don't know what it is. It's about God being our protector and our fortress when times of need, and in fact is from a composer all the way back in the Renaissance, more specifically during the Lutheran Reformation. He composed this piece to be a reflection of Psalm 46 because, you see, Martin Luther was fighting back against something, that being the Catholics' way of doing their religious services. He, first of all, there was a lot of things that he wasn't happy with, but the two main were indulgences, which were, for those who are unaware, basically the Catholic Church asking people to pay for your loved ones or yourself to be able to get into heaven rather than be put into hell in the afterlife. And then the other thing that he was really fighting against was the fact that congregation as a whole really didn't get to participate much in the service. He believed that as a congregation, we should be able to worship God just as much as the priests were able to. But the Catholic Church didn't agree with him, so he decided to split off and create his own movement, the Lutheran movement. And with that being the case, he translated the Bible into their native tongue, and at the time that was German. And then he created quite a few different hymn pieces, and one of them is Ein Festberg. So I would like to demonstrate for you now that piece so that we can start our recital off with a nice, just clear statement of what I want to be looking at through the rest of the recital. So now that we have a clear depiction of what the tune sounds like, especially if you haven't heard it before, that's very important if you're going to look back on something, right? I'm going to now look more specifically at different eras and try to expound just a little bit on some compositional techniques and styles and maybe even a few forms that have come out during those times. First and foremost, during the Renaissance, we have the printing press coming out very recently. So it's not been widely spread throughout the land yet. It's not something that many people can easily get their hands on. And with that being the case, copying music is expensive. It is hard for a musician to get a copy of music, at least a fully made up one, unless you dictate it yourself. And so with that being the case, oftentimes, especially for church organists, they will either dictate it themselves, just the melody line to save themselves some paper, or they will have the melody already written out in their head. And this allows them to do something quite spectacular, in fact, something quite difficult too. It's called improvisation. Any of the musicians out there right now will know exactly what I'm talking about and know that it is a difficult thing to learn. Thankfully, I've had Dr. Howard here to help me learn it myself, and it is with great pleasure that I can show it to you today. So the ways that I'll be improvising for you will be a chordal improvisation, and then a ritornello with a bassa de trompette registration down in the bass. What that all means, just so we can lay it out, an improvisation is just basically composition on the fly. As you're up there performing, you've taken one line, typically the melody, and you're then laying out all the rest of the harmony on top of that on your own during the moment. It's not written out for you. You don't know what it might be. In fact, it could even change at times as you're going from what you had originally thought you might want to do. But that's okay. That's how composition works. And that's even more fact that music is a living, breathing thing and can change in an instant. The other version of this improvisation that I'll be doing, ritornello, is just basically a passage that will be recurring after different episodic pieces of music. So in this instance, I'll have one small melody motif that I'll bring back every so often after certain cadence points. And then the bassa de trompette, like I said, is just it's registration. The organ is a wonderful instrument and can do all sorts of amazing things with its sound, and one such thing is a trumpet-type sound. In order to do that, this French style just adds it to the bass, allowing it to come out just a little bit more and giving it a nice, brassy just timbre. It's wonderful. So please enjoy as I improvise for you on A Mighty Fortress. And so it's with this that we move on from the Renaissance era and more fully into what most people are familiar with, being the Baroque. This era is stagnated with still a very religious atmosphere. Music was still very much played in the churches, and not that it wasn't played in courts or for other things, but it was still very much a very common theme. And with that, we have a lot of really wonderful composers, two of which we'll be looking at tonight. The first of which is Johann Christoph Bach. Some of you may recognize that name and think, oh, that's Bach's oldest brother, so Johann Sebastian. Johann Sebastian's Bach's oldest brother. But that is not the case, actually. This is, in fact, his uncle. His uncle was born in 1642 on December 6th and died in 1705, March 31st. This was a wonderful man. He was an organist and composer. He was able to get a job. This is probably one of the most amazing things about him. For a court, the Duke of Eisenach was his patron. And with that, he was able to do a lot of wonderful things, to the point where Johann Sebastian Bach is credited as in his obituary notice in 1754 as saying that Johann Christoph Bach was just as good at inventing beautiful thoughts as he was with expressing words. So quite a wonderful man, I would say, and you'll see just as much how wonderful he is with his compositional skills in just a moment here. Our other composer that's right on your next on your list there is Johann Pachelbel. Pachelbel was born on September 1st, 1653, and died March 9th, 1706. In 1673, he was appointed as the deputy organist for the St. Stephen Cathedral, and from there he moved on and eventually worked at the same exact court as Christoph Bach. It's the same Duke, the Duke Saxe of Eisenach. He worked with the Kapellmeister, which for those who don't know is just basically a fancy way of saying the person who's in charge of all the music and is in charge of conducting the orchestra and the choir. In fact, that same Kapellmeister, his name is Daniel Eberlin, was credited as saying that Pachelbel was perfect and a rare virtuoso. He also, just as a little side note, was in fact able to teach Johann Sebastian Bach's oldest brother. The one I earlier mentioned was Johann Christoph Bach, but again. So with that being said, the reason I've covered both of these composers tonight at the same time is because I'll be playing both of their pieces back to back. They're both from the Baroque period. But real quickly, let's just take a look at what we might have during this period. We see a few changes. First and foremost, we start switching from what we know as the church modes, which, for those who are unaware, are a form of scales that have either raised or lowered pitches in different locations to give them a different sound, whether they be darker or lighter. We change from those to what we now know commonly as major and minor, more abundantly. We also start seeing a lot more changes in our dynamics. Oftentimes we see a shift from dynamics nowadays as a gradual change, either softer to quiet or quiet to loud. But back then, they were more akin to doing things a little more abruptly. So instead of being soft to gradually getting loud, it might be soft to all of a sudden we're in a loud section of the piece and you should wake up and be energized. This was a very common thing for the time. Melodies became a little more long. They started to be a lot less just short little ideas. And from here, we also start to see a lot more ornaments and trills. For those who don't know, that's the part of the music where, especially flutes like to do this a lot, where you'll be playing through and then they might hold a note and go and have this nice little trill. In fact, here, I'll show you real fast. I have to actually have a registration on them, I hope. Just something like that, something simple. There's also, we start to see just a little bit the sonata raise its head. That's just a multi-movement piece that's typically for a solo instrument. We also see something called a suite, which is not a room in an apartment or anything like that. It's actually a group of dances. They don't have to actually dance to it, but they're supposed to be dance-like musically. With that being said, the type of technique I'll be covering today in these two pieces is called a fugue. So we're going to focus just a little bit on that. A fugue is something extra special. It's a polyphonic idea. Typically, we have, it's always going to start with a subject, which is the main motivic idea, and it's always going to be on the tonic note, which for those who aren't musically trained, that means just the first pitch of the scale. Then from there, it answers back with an answer. Funny how that works. The answer is going to be in the dominant, which is the 5th position in our scale. And this will go on until all the voices have stated the motivic idea at least once. And then it will start to do some episodic things. It will start to expand on this idea. And eventually it will end one last time with the subject. So with that, I would like to demonstrate for you this wonderful technique. I'll first be playing Johan Christophe Bach and then Pachelbel. Pretty powerful, right? So it's from here that we move on to the classical era, but we have a bit of a conundrum, sadly. The classical era is not as well known for its church music as it is for its socio-cultural music, and that's because at the time, music had begun to evolve into something that was less just for praising God and a lot more into something that was meant for enjoyment of the ears, expressing oneself, especially when we get into the Romantic era here, as well as just becoming something that's a lot less seen in churches. And that's not to say that church music doesn't exist, because that was obviously untrue. If it exists now, I would hope that it had existed back then too. It just is that there was a cultural shift, so it's a lot harder to find the church music as it was in the past. With that being the case, both for the classical and Romantic era, we'll still be looking at it and seeing just a little bit of what ideas came from there. First and foremost, we have equal temperament becoming more of a thing. Before that, there was a lot of different ideas on how to tune your instrument. It could be tuned in several different ways, but after a while, we decided that music needs to be more standardized, as it was becoming more so just in general. And so we decided equal temperament was the way to go, and that's what we've continued with until this day. We also start seeing a lot more contrasting moods. So instead of having everything being uplifting all the time, we start to see some darker stuff come out, some new ideas. And like I've said, if it's going to grow, it's going to start gaining new techniques and new ideas. Next, we have a lot more balancing of phrases, a lot clearer cadences. It's a lot easier to tell when we're moving from one idea to the other is basically what that's trying to say. We have a lot more homophonic textures, which just basically means that we have a lot more chordal things, kind of like what I improvised on earlier on Mighty Fortress. It's a lot more like that, very clear-cut. These are my nice chords. I'd like them to sound nice and sound all together instead of having a lot more polyphonic harmony like we just had in our fugal pieces. One fantastic composer from this era, and most people should know his name, is Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. This amazing composer, sadly, he was an organist, but he didn't actually get to work as much on the organ as I think he would have liked. The reason being is he's quoted as saying that the organ is the queen of the instruments. And I think I'd have to agree with him. With everything that it's able to do and all the different sounds it's able to make, I can basically be a one-man symphony all by myself, and it's all thanks to the organ. He was out there doing all sorts of things. He started to write operas, symphonies. These are just a few of the ideas that were out at the time. But all sorts of ideas were coming out and starting to become prevalent. We started to have more and more people wanting to create kind of their own thing, or even in the case of Wolfgang, having to live paycheck to paycheck, and so it's whatever the other person wants you to write for them. These ideas, and I should have said this earlier, all musical ideas, everything that we have accumulated from the past, from the Renaissance, even from ancient music, has continued to move on through the ages and has continued to be built upon. So the Baroque era music, it wasn't just an automatic switch from, oh, okay, well, I think we should do something different, so we should change the name of what musical era we're living in. That's not how it works. History people now, music historians, have now labeled these. They were not labeled at the time. It was a gradual change, and that's very easy to see with our next composer in the Romantic era, Beethoven. Beethoven was actually trained classically, and he enjoyed playing it, but he much preferred doing his own thing. He wanted to do a lot more emotional things, start to branch out in the harmonic ideas that he could do, more so than just the typical chord progressions. And with that being the case, he was one of the leading spearheads for what is now Romantic music. Romantic music, like I said, is a lot more emotional. It has a lot elaborate harmonic progressions, a lot bigger orchestras. We started to see a whole lot more instruments being created as well as mastered in their the way that they were being made. We started to see even larger melodic ideas, bigger dynamics. This is especially when we start to see a lot of those crescendos and diminuendos, a lot more growing and shrinking instead of just being, oh, okay, I think it's time to switch to the loud section now. And then on top of that, one thing, and this is another big reason why church music, sadly, was not as big of a thing at the time, was that we started to become a lot more nationalistic, and that affected our music greatly. A lot of musicians were being tasked with creating music that was supposed to be, oh, this is very Russian. I want to hear a lot of Russian music. Oh, we need a German piece to represent us as a nation. And that's when we started to get more of these ideas when it comes to music. Meaning, again, that sadly, we don't have as much emphasis on church music. So we don't see as much of that. All these ideas, though, are things we see today. I mean, I'm sure all of you, having been here at a concert right now, have heard some sort of a musical idea at one point or another, either on the radio or at a concert, or even maybe your niece or nephew playing the piano. And all of these have grown from the past ideas. The difference here is that as we start to go into a modern age, we start to get even more creative. Oh, let's start to do jazz. Let's have some really odd chord progressions, things that sound really dissonant and then all of a sudden fix themselves, things that sound dissonant and then don't resolve and just sound kind of weird, but it's weird with a purposeful idea in place. We even start to have things like the piece 430, which is just silence. It's just the audience. So modern music is odd, and it continues to get odder. But with that being the case, we also have a lot of callbacks to original music. This is one such case. The piece that will be next is a Canadian brass quintet piece. The Canadian brass was formed by Chuck Hallenbach, and he was able to garnish 4 other brass people to join him and create wonderful music, some of which were Dixie tunes, some of which were more based on older music, some were new compositions, and now they are a very famous and well-known group all across the world. And so with that, I would like to welcome you to our Canadian brass section of our concert. An amazing piece, right? The arranger did a fantastic job, and you can clearly hear we have that same kind of classical homophonic thing going on right at the beginning, but then he switches back to that old fugue style right there in the middle, and it's just so wonderful to hear all together. Next up, we have a wonderful piece that I'm actually very excited for. This piece is by Margaret Vardela Sandreski. She's an organist and a composer who is still alive today. She was born in 1921 and is 100 years old currently. With that being the case, she graduated college from Salem College in 1942 and has since been continuing her musical career both as an organist and a composer. She's composed for a lot of things. She's, I would say, really amazing and someone that I really hope I can be like as a composition major. We have her doing things for harpsichord, piano, solo instruments, woodwind ensembles, all sorts of different things. It's wonderful. She's even so esteemed to have received in North Carolina the highest award that a governor can give in the state, which is called the Order of the Long Pine. Very fantastic woman and really amazing. Her piece is in something called a trio texture. It's just basically three voices that are equal but harmonically playing together. And with that being the case, these three voices are two of which in the organ and one of which on the tuba. So I would invite you to enjoy this Ein feste Burg in the old style. Wow, I don't feel like I've been up here actually that long at all, to be honest. I thought it would feel a little bit longer at the end. To be fair, though, I'm excited because this is the culmination of my work. It is at this point that I would like to introduce you to my own work, my own creation, my own composition. I am someone who likes to compose based off of feelings, stories, ideas, and with that being the case, this composition is no different. Although this is a basic binary form piece, which just basically means that it's two larger sections, an A and a B section, it has an overarching idea, and that being one of the prodigal son. Sometimes I think everybody can feel this way a little bit. You feel stressed, scared, worried about what's going on around you. You could even just be in a really horrible situation. It might not be something that you have complete control over. And that's what the first half of my piece represents. You'll hear the rain coming down, the continuous droning wind going on and on behind the prodigal son as he's whisked about in this storm, trying his best to find something, anything to help him and to keep him safe. And in the distance, he can see it, and you'll hear it. There's a fortress out there. That's my dad's fortress. I should head there. That's the last place I know that I'll probably be wanted, but it's the place that will probably be safest. I'll beg him to come back, and I'll do anything he needs me to. And so as he hears that in the distance, he begins to grow closer and closer, until eventually coming upon the gates where the guards see him, let the king know, and there's a great celebration as the prodigal son has returned back to the fortress and is now safe and sound inside. I hope that you have enjoyed the concert, and just before I let you go, I do believe that there are some refreshments outside, so I'd ask, my wonderful fiancée was willing to get those for me, and I thank her. So please enjoy them, and enjoy my piece.